community engagement and mobilization. And it's been one of public service, but at different levels and in different areas. Starting off as a journalist and then moving into politics and then in government, where I sat as Associate Chief of Staff to the Health Minister, and then moving into leadership positions within the civil service at McGill University Health Centre, and then into philanthropy, so on the nonprofit side. The consistency among all of those roles is this desire for social impact, this desire for social change. Now, I went into journalism because I wanted to change the world. I wanted to write those stories that would create those global turning points, and was frustrated at the speed at which change would occur, which was way too slow in my mind. And then moving into politics and government, which is really focused on big ideas and big movements. You're really thinking through every step of the way, how do you bring about social change? Because often these big ideas are not accepted by society quite yet. So a good government, a really good government, is not implementing the change that society is demanding. It is implementing the change that it knows has to occur. And sometimes you have to take the community in and help them understand that path. And I'll give you a clear example. Our government, under Jean Charest's leadership, implemented the first tobacco ban in restaurants, bars, schools. And we often forget that it was a widespread belief that smoking was cultural in Quebec and that you could not separate the Québécois from the smoking. But we knew, looking at all the data and the fact that we had one of the highest lung cancer and overall cancer rates in the world, 100% linked to our tobacco rates, we knew we had to get this done. And so we worked with all of the nonprofits, the civil service, the community, the restaurants, the bars. We brought everyone together to bring about the social change we knew we needed to do. And then we saw, as we built that movement, we saw public support rise significantly. And today, no one would ever reconsider the fact that we've banned tobacco. So I use this example because it's what ties all of these different careers that I've had is understanding people, understanding what they are passionate about, what makes them move, what inspires them, and making sure that we can engage them towards a common goal, which is improving our communities. And there's no better place than nonprofits. There's no better place than philanthropy. So important, especially in the post-COVID environment. And we saw it when the manpower shortage hit us. So it was a huge challenge for nonprofits and for the private sector. And we saw that the younger generation, the millennials and the younger generation as well, really want to work in places that correspond to their own values. And they want to feel like they are contributing in some positive way, not only to their community, but to the world. And again, Sarah, this is a great opportunity for nonprofits who, for the most part, are contributing to the betterment of our community. So brand is unbelievably important. I think people ignored that for a really long time. It is important, and your values and your mission are closely tied to your brand. We can't be everything to everybody. There are many organizations, and if we want to be able to inspire others to join us, and I include in that our staff, in the recruitment and the retention, we have to represent something. And that is your brand. What do you represent? What do you bring to the world? What do you bring to the community? And to be very specific, if you try to be everything to everybody, you're absolutely nothing, and you cannot compete. And whether you're in the private sector or in the public sector, you can't sprinkle yourself, then you will achieve nothing. So in the hospital sector, which I've worked in for a long time, in politics and government, we look at 2 political parties, 3 or 4 political parties, and we try to determine what they represent in big ideas and who corresponds to our values. When we are looking at a hospital and trying to determine where we want to donate, we are looking at the hospital that corresponds with our big dreams, our big goals, and our values again. And so it's really important to tie all of that together. When I arrived at UHN Foundation a few months ago as CEO, that was one of the first exercises that we completed together, is working on those values. We're working on our mission. Now we're working on our vision. But what was really important in terms of the brand is we all knew internally that this was Canada's #1 hospital, that the gap between the #1 and the #2 hospital is immense in this country. Last week, we were recognized as the 3rd most important hospital in the world, the only publicly funded hospital in the top 10 hospitals in the world. And so, interestingly enough, again, this was not shared with the community for a long time. It was just known, and we're now sharing those stories. And it's not just because of philanthropy, but it's about pride. Mm-hmm. You know, our staff, our doctors, our clinician scientists, and the community, because they built this incredible institution. So we are now sharing this brand widely and making sure that everyone can feel the same sense of pride that we do internally. And it's interesting that people are still questioning the need for inclusivity and diversity. You know, when we think about an election, we all understand that we need the entire population to vote, because the government needs to be a representation of the entire population, not just one segment, not just the majority or the minority. And yet when we're looking at public and private sector and nonprofit boards, that doesn't necessarily resonate as rapidly. And, you know, when I'm looking at my own organization, I always say, I dream of the day that our donor base looks like our patient base, because these are the individuals that we are serving. This is the community we are serving. And so we should be focusing on engaging all of them within their capacity within our organization, and they can then have impact. So, you know, our boards of directors and our staff are the places where diversity is most required. And in our team at UHN Foundation, we have an incredibly diverse team and community, and we have many committees that keep us on guard and making sure that we make the right decisions, and that we try and remove to the best of our abilities the systemic racism that is naturally there in our hiring practices and our retention and our performance assessments. And when we're looking at our boards, I think most nonprofits, and we see it in the private sector as well, are not as diverse as they could and should be. And so today on International Women's Day, perhaps focusing a little bit on the lack of diversity of women, we are seeing an increase in the number of women on boards across all sectors, but it's still insignificant. And the impact is so clear. And I'll give you a clear example. In my previous organization, we had a very small number of women in the beginning. And the women who were there were not necessarily from the private sector, and their comfort level on the governance side was limited, and their voices were not heard. And I remember one woman we brought in first, so she was sort of by herself as a representation on this new board. And every time she would say something, there was no recognition around the board table, and yet a man 5 minutes later would repeat exactly the same thing, and everyone say, yes, you're absolutely right, and she would get very frustrated. But the second we shifted and we brought in numerous women with the same kind of profile, where they were comfortable enough to express themselves, right? Because it's not just about having a woman in the seat. We want her to contribute because we brought her to the table. We want to hear her voice. So she has to have the ability and the comfort and the security to express herself. The second we shifted that, the women's voices became heard. And that was a huge transformation. And then we began to bring in even more women. So it's the first few who come on the board who change the dynamics that have the hard part, the hard work, but it's so worth it. And you see the shift in the priorities of where we contribute. You know, I don't like to generalize, but, you know, women tend to have more empathy, more desire for social impact rather than making money. So it is a generalization, but this is what I have seen in my career. There's also an emotional attachment to values, which is really important. It's important to me. And so I really like when our boards and our teams are connected emotionally to the values, and so that we respect those and we make decisions that ensure that we always live and work within our values. Trying to recruit women even now to join our boards and also to tackle C-suite roles. I always get the same answer of, I don't have a lot of free time, my kids need me. And in fact, a lot of the young women that I'm mentoring right now, I always get the same answer from them, saying, well, I need to plan my career to take a step back during these years and these years so that I can spend more time at home with my children. And unfortunately, those are self-imposed obstacles. If you decide, if you choose to slow down your career during a certain period of time, you will not catch up. You will not reach the CEO position if you self-impose a slowdown. And we see the same thing with boards. To get on a private sector board, you have to have served on a nonprofit board. That's your opportunity. That is your stepping stone. And if you self-impose a barrier to joining a nonprofit because you feel guilty as a parent that you may not be home every night for dinner, then you are preventing yourself by the time you reach your 50s from joining a private sector board. And I did that myself. I have to be completely honest. There was a turning point in my own life. I had very young children. I think at the time they were 3 and 7. And I had made a decision to take a step back in my career and take a different role that would allow me to be home and to have less stress and spend more time with my children. And I was blessed with having many mentors, some women, but a lot of men, and they have a very different perspective and constantly waking us up. And I remember seeing one of my key mentors who has become one of my closest friends. And I said to him, I've resigned and I'm going to take a step back in my career and spend more time with my children. And he said, that's a load of crap. Get a nanny and get over it. And it's interesting, right? And even when I was contemplating whether or not to take this role, which required an important move, every woman, all my female mentors told me not to do it. And all of my male friends and mentors told me, are you crazy? Why wouldn't you do it? And so it is a self-imposed barrier that we have to remind ourselves as we're thinking it through, that we're thinking it through from a female lens. And there are advantages to that, but there are also disadvantages. We want more female CEOs. We want more women on boards. And so how do I as a CEO modify the role of a board director to be able to allow more women to come in? How do I modify the workplace to allow more VPs to prepare the succession for me, which is also top priority? So we have to be thinking about those things. And then we have to mentor. We have to mentor young women, and we have to remind them they don't need to take a step back, but maybe they need to change the way that they organize their lives. So what I have done is I've identified in my life what I don't enjoy doing. I don't enjoy mowing the lawn or cleaning my house, and I get support. It takes a community to raise children, and we've got to be able to rely on those communities so that we can benefit from women in the CEO roles, and because they are a secure, safe sounding board, not only for your career, but for your life. And having many mentors is really important so that you can balance the different opinions. And also, mentors are the ones that pull and push you. And I've had that many times, that they have nominated me for positions that I didn't feel ready, and that they would then encourage me and say, you are ready. Because it is a female response as well, Sarah, is that we tend to always feel 10 steps behind. And we will not apply on positions if we are not 9 points out of 10 on the list of requirements, whereas most men would apply when they reach 4 or 5. So it is important to have mentors to encourage us, to help us, and to provide a safe space. So that's important. And when I am providing mentoring, I mentor a lot because I did find it very challenging over the years to find female mentors. And I think it's a question of balance as well in their lives. Women are very busy. They have a stronger sense of guilt for home life. We feel guilty at work, feel guilty at home. And so mentoring does take time out of our busy schedules. But it is such an important investment of that time, because if we want to push and pull the next generation of women, we need to make sure that we are providing them that support and that safe space. And the last point I'll make is that the generation that came before us, Sarah, they had a very different experience than we did. They, for the most part, many of them were told that they had to choose between their careers and being mothers, whereas our generation was allowed to penetrate both. And it is thanks to them that was allowed, but they did suffer immensely. And that also impacts their opinion and their perspectives. And we have to remember that. I am unbelievably grateful to those women. And then the last point, which I guess has affected me a lot in my career and has really affected my perspective now, is the question of sexual harassment in the workplace. And so, systemic sexism does exist and has always existed. But in my days, when I first started my career, it was perfectly normal, and you were told that you had to accept being groped under the table and being commented on. And today I have an absolute zero tolerance for the young women in my office. And this is something that I take very seriously, because I remember just how challenging it was to feel like you were respected professionally when you were continuously pushed back into a certain role if you're in the middle of a business negotiation and the man reaches over, touches your arm and says, "Can I kiss you?" That doesn't bode well for a business negotiation. And so we've made great strides, but as the female leaders today, we have a responsibility to push it farther and to make sure that all of that is eliminated, and to allow for more women to feel comfortable and secure coming up the pipeline and coming to networking events.